Most people know that there is some risk to investing in retirement planning. In fact, risk tolerance for the investor is a key factor in deciding where to put your money. But most people don't know that there are non financial risks as well. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with Chris Maduri about what those risks are and how you can avoid them to ensure a comfortable retirement. My guest today is Chris Maduri, who spent nearly 2 decades working inside the world of retirement and investment planning, helping people prepare for the moment when work no longer defines their days. Starting his career just before the financial crisis, he saw early how fragile plans can be when they depend on markets behaving and assumptions holding. That experience shaped his focus on predictability, income reliability, and building financial structures that can support real life, not just good scenarios. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. I appreciate it.
So, we're going to talk today of sort of the non-financial risks of retirement. Certainly, there are enough financial ones. We all have our own level of risk tolerance, and that's how we often plan our investments. Something that we're comfortable with. Some of us are more risk tolerant, others are more risk averse. So you have that balancing, and of course, it depends on where you are in this journey. If you're in your 20s, well, there's plenty of room for risk because there's time to get the money back. But if you're 60, it's a whole other ballgame. But those are the financial risks that we have, and there are also some non-financial ones. Tell us about what to expect and plan for there.
Yeah, it's really such a great question because I think most people spend, 40 years planning for their financial side of retirement and, about 4 minutes planning for the psychological and the emotional components of it. And, you realize that retirement, it's not just a financial transition,
Mhm.
it's also a life transition.
Mhm.
So that could kind of bring up a lot of stuff for people, and really kind of catch people off guard, more than anything else. The good news about it is that most of these things can be overcome, even if you didn't plan for it the majority of the time when you're in retirement. It's, not a Herculean effort to correct these types of things.
Mhm.
But, when I think about the non-financial retirement risks, I kind of put them into a couple of different categories. The first is purpose, people, health, and then identity. And just to briefly expand on those. So when we think of purpose, right, our job not only gave us a paycheck, but it really gave us a sense of structure and
Mhm.
contribution. And once retirement hits, we find that we have a lot of free time on our hands,
Mhm.
right? And it's kind of like, oh, well, now what? You know, so that loss of purpose can really shake some people, especially, high achieving folks. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but um, so yeah, purpose I think is the big one. The second one is people, because we don't realize that in our daily lives, the majority of the people that we had talked to, that was kind of our social network, right? You think about the people at work, the friendships that you had, who you had lunch with, um, that kind of becomes your social circle. So when you're plucked out of that, suddenly things change. And I think this one impacts men in particular. I'm not sure about you, but I know for myself, I've made uh, not, it's just the majority of the friends that I've made in life have been a product of my marriage, right?
Mhm.
She makes friends, so I make friends. I'm not sure how many friends I've proactively made on my own since high school. Could probably count them on one hand, though. So, when you think about that, for men, we take that away. If we don't have a life planned out, you can go a long time, really not seeing anyone, talking to anybody. And that loneliness can kind of become a health risk, right? As well as an emotional risk. So I would say that's concern number two. The third one, and we don't know how this is going to impact us, is health, right? Because you can have a perfectly funded retirement, but if your health is limiting your freedom, your lifestyle is going to shrink.
Mhm.
So the better we take care of ourselves, I know you've been hearing a lot of like health is wealth. I keep hearing that mantra, over and over again lately. And it's so true. Not only um, in the way that we're talking about it from a non-financial, but also in a financial sense, right? Because if you require long-term care, this is one of the greatest financial risks of retirement as well. And then the fourth one is the identity, and um, a lot of people don't realize just how much of their identity was tied to their career,
Mhm.
unfortunately, until it's gone. That purpose that you had, um, if you were in a position where you had people beneath you, right? People asking for your opinion, sense of status, things like that. That title really meant something to a lot of people. Also, if you're a teacher, if you're a police officer, a fireman, once you're, no longer Jim the police officer, you're just Jim. It's a little bit different. Um, so I think those are a little bit of an umbrella, and some broad strokes, but those would be the four
Mhm.
that really tend to trip people up.
Well, we'll talk about them more individually. But you mentioned the loss of identity. This is also something that is uh, very endemic in the military. People
Yeah.
retire, and hey, when I was in the army, I was a full bird colonel, and I had all sorts of people I had authority under. I had respect. I had this, that, and the other thing. I was important. And you retire, and you're just like I said, you're plain old Jim. You're not this colonel, this important person.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that you get identity and purpose and general. I guess the word is structure too. You've got uh, the your life to a great extent is structured by your career, your job, what you do, working,
Yeah.
and everything else tends to be more incidental what you have time left to do in your life, and you realize that and you don't realize that once you retire, that second part becomes all of it, and you lose
Yeah.
that structure. I had did an episode a long time ago, and I'll leave the link in the show notes, but on planning for your retirement in a non-financial way. You plan for retirement. You put your money into the 401k and into the IRA and your pension, your whatever you've got in your portfolio, and you're saving, and you hope you have enough money. But what you don't plan for is what you're going to do with it, and what your purpose is going to be. My wife and I both, our friends are getting a little sick of hearing it, but we'll say, well, when we retire, we're going to almost became a drinking game. It was just
Right.
talking about it so much, but that's a good thing. You know,
Yeah.
start talking about that. Start thinking about and having those dreams of what you're going to do when you retire. There's an attorney I know that I said, when are you retiring? He says, I don't know. He says, a lot of the people I talk to, they retire and, their life is, sitting around watching TV and you know, that's it. And I said, well, it's a lack of planning, right?
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I think a lot of people, um, that structure they really depended on, I think more than they, realized that title carried meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It, there was a responsibility, their calendar, um, kind of, it gave them a sense of self-worth. It validated a lot in their life. And it's, if we don't plan, filling that spot with something meaningful, like you could fill time, right? That's not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But doing it in a way that's meaningful is going to give you a sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose our relevance. We don't want to lose our meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we, may think, oh, I'm gonna, spend time with the grandkids and I'm gonna, do this and that. It, you don't necessarily know that it's going to work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you don't necessarily know that you're going to have the stamina to do that either, because Unfortunately, everyone's waiting to have kids. So,
Hmm.
my grandparents watched me, but they were also 50, like 55
Yeah.
at that time. My folks are not. And, I was 40 when I had my last kid. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't have it, but so yeah, a lot's changed. And it's just so sudden. So to your point, the more that you can do to prepare for what that's like and kind of, test it out, right? Get some, what's your day going to look like and get kind of specific of like, what am I going to do on a Tuesday? And you're not going to fill every moment,
Right.
but in order to, limit the amount of, they call it decision fatigue, right? And for coming from a loss of routine, the better off you're going to be,
Well,
right?
how does that loss of routine feed into decision fatigue? What is the problem that we're looking at here? As far as you no longer have that structure and routine of going to work, doing your job, coming home. But how does
Yeah.
that lead to decision fatigue in retirement?
Well, during your working years, most of your day is structured for you, right?
Mhm.
You kind of know when you're going to arrive. You have your meetings on the calendar. You know when you're waking up. You know when you're going to work. You know who you're meeting for the day. In retirement, every day is a blank canvas.
Mhm.
And that sounds freeing, but it also means you're making dozens more decisions every day than you did while you were working. And it's been researched, and the more decisions we make, the more mentally drained we become. And
Mhm.
over time, that lack of structure can lead to lower physical activity, less social engagement, less cognitive stimulation, right? And the long-term impact of those things is higher anxiety, rates of depression, and even faster cognitive decline.
Mhm.
So we want to be aware of that and, kind of fill our day, not overfill, but put some sort of structure in place to kind of match the way that we're wired as humans.
Mhm. No, you start talking about an increase in decision fatigue in retirement. I just want to make sure I understand and the listeners understand what you're talking about. It sounds to me that when you're working, you say, well, I what am I going to do today? Well, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to do
Right.
this. But and the decisions to a great extent are made for you. Either going well, of course, I'm going to work. It's Tuesday, but also a lot of what you do at work has been put on your disk and say, here, do this. So
Yep.
the decisions aren't there. And now you wake up and you're retired and you say, well, what am I going to do today? Uh, and I mean, it can be a lack of a decision if you don't know. I would think the decision fatigue would come from too many options, wouldn't they? What of all the many things I want to do I want to do today?
Yeah. Yeah. There's just too many choices, too many. You're not choosing between A, B, or C or A and B. Now you're like, oh, should I go do this or go do that? And it becomes very overwhelming, right? Humans are wired for rhythm. And we kind of had that rhythm throughout our careers. So retirement really works best when you replace the old rhythm with a new one. Yeah, because otherwise you're going to end up having um, this blank canvas where you're constantly having to make decisions, and it's just very overwhelming for people to do so. So you kind of shut down a little bit.
And that idea of the loss of routine, you're going from to a great extent a more structured life because of your job and just being a parent, right? Your life is
Yeah.
structured not only in going to work and what you're doing at your job, but after you come home and all right, this kid's got soccer, this kid's got band, we've got this concert activity in the evening, and you're running around and you have these things to do, and now the kids are raised, you're empty nesters, you're no longer working, and it's really a shift in mindset too. Sort of learning how to lean into the loss of structure. When you say,
Yeah. Yeah. You have to lean into it. And ultimately, you have to fill the time. And you can fill the time with something meaningful, or you can, fill the time with something that doesn't really, speak to your soul, right? Your career, hopefully you were passionate about it before, but even if you weren't, that structure and that rhythm that you were in still matters to you. Um, and when I think one of the things is because it disappears overnight, right? Some people transition into working part-time or consulting and that's really helpful for a lot of people. But the folks where it's, just an off switch, I showed up yesterday, I'm not going to show up today without any type of planning, that can present some challenges for folks.
And getting involved in in local community organizations, things like that. There are ways of well, I'm going to play more golf. Well, you still have to be motivated to go out to the golf course and maybe learn how to play golf. But in you say, well, join. Maybe there's a where I live, there's a senior center. Is there where you can go to that have activities and things like that, and join an organization. Maybe you never had time while you were working to join the Masons or the Elks or the Knights of Columbus or whatever organization, but doing that and getting involved in that gives you not only some structure but maybe a social outlet as well.
Yeah, yeah, that is huge. And I always think of retirement as the freedom to pursue your passions.
Mm-hmm.
You never really had time for that before. Um, but we don't know what we're passionate about. And sometimes things like golf stick out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but otherwise, you don't necessarily know. And if we're closed off and closed minded to what's out there, we're kind of limiting, what our second act could be. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be a monetary thing. It could be volunteering. It could be, spending time with family. It could be, having a card game, whatever the case may be. My wife and I just started playing Mahjong. So
Ah,
definitely, definitely recommend that to some folks. Give that one a try.
uh-huh.
Not only is it a lot of fun, but from a cognitive standpoint and the pattern recognition, that'll keep you young. Really fun game.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also a great time. I'm a very spiritual person, so really good time to work on the relationship with God. Spending time in prayer and meditation. That's another. Um, I'm a big meditation guy, and the ability to control your thoughts and has so much cognitive benefit to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to necessarily be out and about playing pickleball every day, but I would, recommend that we try some different things because some of the things that you like doing before, you may not physically be able to, handle. If you love playing full court games of basketball, might be a little bit challenging at 75, 80 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Very admirable if you can, but so just making sure that we're taking care of our health, we're taking care of our mental faculties, we're taking care of our soul, right? We're really able to find meaning and purpose in how we're spending our time.
Well, and the spiritual is important, but also the especially in smaller communities, more rural communities, the suburbs and everything, the a church or a religious community becomes often the social hub of that community. There's community built in.
Yeah.
You go to church, you get to know your parishioners, the members of the church with you, and there are also all sorts of activities and things that you can get involved in there. That aside from the spiritual aspect of it, can maybe give you some of that structure.
Yeah. That's it, to build that sense of community,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be in church or, other organizations. I think the key is to have something to retire to, not just something to retire from, right? So if you have, a purpose replacement ready, and there's just so many opportunities that are out there now, especially with Zooms. You don't even have to leave your house, right? You can mentor somebody that was in the field that you were, previously in serving a church, serving, nonprofits or boards, or there's so many different outlets that you can have if you stay open to them. And, the key is just saying yes.
And another thing that happens, and this was another episode of another guest. We were talking about, where you retire. Are you going to retire in place? Are you continue to where you live now, or are you going to move to a more retirement friendly state or country?
Yeah.
And it may be, you might want to retire to Florida or Texas or North Carolina, some of these other states that are more retirement friendly, but then you're moving away from a lot of, I mean, you may retire, but a lot of your friends you've made are still there.
Yep.
uh, a lot of the things that you could be doing, or family as well, and that retiring to another state can also be very isolating, and actually make all of this worse, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. That social calendar, if it's totally empty, and it's not easy. You go to a new state, if you don't know people, or maybe you know one person, you can kind of fall into a pattern of spending a lot of time alone, not in the healthy way either. Um, so yeah, that's it's a big consideration. The more that you can put into place earlier on,
Mhm.
the better off you'd be. If you were going to go to Florida and if you have the opportunity to purchase the home prior to without selling yours, where you can spend some time down there, you can get to know some folks, you can, um, have the ability to put these pieces in place before the retirement date.
Right.
That I think is going to put people in a, really solid position to receive, have a positive outcome.
And sometimes you can have the best of both worlds if you retire. Say, I'm going to retire to a more uh, retirement friendly state, say Florida.
Not
And
Connecticut.
oh, I don't know what Connecticut is, but there's snow in Connecticut. But uh,
Exactly.
but so you spend 181 days in Florida, and you establish residency, and that gives you a lot of the economic benefits of that state without completely leaving your old state. And you come
Yeah.
back, and you retire. You worked in Florida, you worked in New Jersey, say where I am, and you retire to Florida, establish residency there, but you still come back. You still have a lot of the structure that you had, the friends, whatever. You're just not seeing them as much, so you're not completely letting go. And you can either continue that or say, you know what, I've been down here long enough that I've reestablished myself in a new location, and I can sell the place in New Jersey and just stay here year round.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you a sense of control.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you've kind of built that community really before you need to have that community around you. And yeah,
Well,
like
there's
anything
also
else, right? More
well,
planning's
that's
better.
all. You also mentioned identity and the loss of identity as far as who you are.
Yeah.
And I interviewed someone on the topic of, we should all have this problem, but dealing with inherited wealth. You didn't do anything to earn it or to make it. It's handed to you, and that can be a real problem if with identity. Who am I? Am I
Yeah.
am I something other than a trust fund baby, or
Yeah.
uh, wait, what purpose do I have in life? Because of this inheritance, because of this wealth, I don't have to work. So you don't have that structure and identity that can come from work. So you have to go out and make sure you find your own identity. And that's
Yeah.
what this guest talked about. So how do we let's go down a little bit deeper into the topic of identity and loss of identity in retirement. How does that happen, and what do we do about
Yeah, and I've talked to folks in the past that kind of come away with the same, it's never a verbatim, but the same kind of message, which you didn't realize how much of who you are was tied to what you did,
it?
right? It was tied to your job. It was tied to how you spent your time. And for 30, 40 years, people walk into their room and your job title has kind of announced who you are. It announces what you do, right? If you're somebody that made a lot of decisions and you had a full calendar, there's a sense of importance there and that you're needed.
Mhm.
And when that goes away, that is, psychologically going to create just a sense of it's going to shake your self-worth, right? In that sense. And there's kind of a season of rediscovering who you are, right? For this chapter of your life, you know. And retirement, it is a financial transition, but it's also an identity transition, and you have to be open to that and you know, look to look to see what your next, I don't want to say final act, but your next act is going to be.
And for our younger listeners, really, it's this is something that ideally you should start doing way before you retire. I mean,
Yeah.
you can it's something you need to work on when you retire, but you're really better off if you start in your 20s or 30s or whatever to say, what is my identity? Who am I when I'm not at work?
Yeah.
Get involved in those activities or organizations or whatever it is, or where you might meet other people and network with other people through your kids, through the PTA, through whatever. But find out who you are outside of work way before you ever leave work, and have that
Right.
well established by the time you are retired.
Yeah. Very similar to, empty nest syndrome, right? If
Yes.
you're a mom and then you leave the house and that is who you are and your sense of purpose, it gets kind of plucked away from you rather quickly, um, in that sense. And so making sure that we don't have all of our eggs in that one basket, and to your point, trying some different things out beforehand. I'm a parent, I'm also a friend. So do we have friends? Are we checking in with our friends? Making sure that we're not socially isolated, from other people. Because you don't, even if you retire to where you've been living, your kids could move away, right? Your friends may still be working. You may
Yep.
be dealing with the death of a spouse or the death of friends or mobility limitations. So, um, the different groups that you can kind of participate in and be around means that it's not, all those eggs in one basket. And yeah,
Mhm. So we've talked about sort of purpose and identity, and I guess people ties into that a great extent as far as relationships with people and friends and everything else. Um, let's talk a little bit about health. I mean, you're uh, I guess if you're a very active person when you were working, then going to a more sedentary life uh, might have some health issues as well, and you have to keep up, you know, exercising, activity, whatever it is, uh, to stay healthy. Any tips
yeah,
there or thoughts?
yeah. I mean, you're the more that you can do to stay healthy, right? Because when your health goes away, that really determines your freedom in retirement,
Mhm.
right? So loss of mobility, chronic pain, cognitive decline, all of these lead to a loss of independence, right? Your ability to move around, and it just kind of limits what your options are, right? So if we treat our health and our diet, you know, um, we get into really good habits earlier on, then we're able to carry those out later on. Because if you're sitting on the couch, snacking all day, that's
Yeah,
not going to end up uh, working out so well for you.
that's exactly what I was thinking. Just sort of watching TV and eating popcorn or candy or whatever it is, just eating comfort food. Uh,
Yeah,
but staying active and staying agile, keep
yeah,
learning. One of the things
that,
my wife and I are talking about is I think a master class subscription is like $10 a month,
mm,
and you
yeah,
can take all sorts of classes, learn all sorts of things and you keep on learning and keeping up that curiosity, and the mental agility. My in-laws did crossword puzzles way into their 70s or 80s, and kept things on. So I do two crossword puzzles, a Sudoku, and a couple other games every morning, and that's part of my routine. And it
Yeah.
keeps you thinking, keeps you on the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the more you can move, the more you can serve, the more you can learn, the more you can show up for people,
Mm-hmm.
the more fulfilled you're going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what you're looking for, to whatever it is that's going to light you up, to do that as frequently as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the cognitive portion is a really big deal. Um, those are fantastic, and you're still getting enjoyment, right? You're doing the crosswords. I will constantly mispronounce the word Sudoku,
Yeah.
Sudoku. But those things kind of they keep you vibrant, they keep you fresh. Reading, developing new skills, right? That mindset of the Padawan and learning is um, it's such a fulfilling feeling. And then, taking your knowledge and sharing it with other people, right? On the other end, teaching somebody, helping somebody out that's, in a similar field. All great things that we can be doing to, keep us mentally sharp.
So uh, that said, and I mentioned about sense of identity and who you are and purpose, something you build through your working life, so you're not dependent upon your job to do all the heavy lifting. Uh, what are some practical ways listeners can prepare for retirement psychologically, not just financially?
Well, it's kind of putting things into place beforehand and really kind of trying on your retirement, right? Trying something new, structuring your days beforehand, kind of having a retirement calendar and
Mm-hmm.
going through it. So everything doesn't have to be planned to a T, but to kind of have a general framework of this is what I'm going to do. This is the activity I'm going to be doing today, and keeping it consistent. Like, I play cards on Tuesdays, right? I go to yoga on Thursdays, or, I volunteer on Wednesdays. And it doesn't have to be super full, but it gives you something to look forward to. And it creates a framework for you to navigate retirement with purpose, rather than this feeling of just kind of floating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say that and really reaching out, that social calendar is a really big deal, making sure that you have people around you that you're going to be able to spend time with, and putting yourself out there. And again, I think women do a much better job of this than men do.
Mm-hmm.
And men in retirement, a lot of the things that we've offloaded, for lack of a better word, um, I think it's important that we start taking some of those responsibilities back. Because there's a lot of fellas out there that your mom took care of them, then your wife took care of them, and unfortunately, statistics show that when their spouse predeceases them,
Mm-hmm.
they go shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
because everything was kind of tied up in, um, what your partner did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's, I think, really important to take accountability and responsibility for your time. This is such a gift that we've been given, right? You have the freedom to do what you want, and to waste that, um, I think that's, where you see people that you hear the story of like, oh, they worked for 50 years, retired, and a month later passed away. When all of these psychological and, stressors kind of come into play, on top of the financial ones that we're not even discussing, those things can lead to increased stress, higher risk of a heart attack, all of those things. So we just want to mitigate as many of them as possible. And, that's kind of what retirement's about. It's cash flow and risk mitigation. So,
All right. Well, that's a lot to think about. People think about those four areas: purpose, health, identity, and people. And the sooner you start not only thinking about what you want to do in retirement, but establishing, identity and personal connections and structure outside of your job, so it's there when you retire from your job.
yeah.
So obviously you're into the finance game, and what is it you do, Chris, and how do you help people if people want to reach out to you? Uh, what can you do for them?
Yeah, so I consider myself a retirement planner. Some people will say financial planner, but really with a focus on retirement. So helping people to shift from the accumulation phase of life into the decumulation phase, and not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a mental and emotional, and putting plans together of how we're going to spend time. And, love talking to people about it and kind of giving them the peace of mind in retirement to know that we're going to be okay. Not only are we going to be okay, but we're going to thrive because we have everything. We have a good plan in place. So I have a company. It's called Vibrant Retirement, and if you want to take a look, it's vibrantretirement.com.
Mhm.
um, feel free to schedule a call. Happy to talk about finance. Happily to talk about all of the things that we discussed today in the non-financial side. But I really want to help people to have peace of mind and fill their time in a meaningful way.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on the show and giving a different perspective to retirement that most people don't think about. Because the sooner you start thinking about it, the better. Just like saving for retirement. So I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of our conversation, and thanks for coming on the show.
I appreciate you having me, Stephen. Thank you so much. Take care.